November 4th, 1942. El Alamein, Egypt. The desert wind carries smoke and cordite across the shattered remains of Panzer Army Africa. General Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma stands in the turret of his command tank, watching the horizon through binoculars as British shells scream overhead. The ground trembles. Another explosion, closer this time, sends a column of sand and flame into the copper sky. Von Thoma is 51 years old, a career soldier with iron crosses from 2 wars. His face is weathered like the desert itself, carved by decades of command, by Spain, by Poland, by France, by Russia. He commanded tanks before most of the British soldiers hunting him were born. And now, on this scorching afternoon, he is watching his Afrika Korps die. The radio crackles with desperate voices, fuel trucks burning, artillery positions overrun. Rommel has already fled west toward Libya, leaving von Thoma in command of the rear guard. It is a death sentence dressed as military necessity. Through the dust and heat shimmer, von Thoma sees them, British tanks, a dozen or more, advancing in a wide arc. Grant and Sherman tanks, their guns traversing, searching. He looks behind him. 3 panzers remain operational. 3. The rest are burning hulks scattered across 20 miles of desert. He climbs down from the turret and removes his cap. His adjutant looks at him, uncomprehending. "Herr General?" "It's finished," von Thoma says quietly. He brushes sand from his uniform tunic, straightens his collar. "I will not run." The British tanks are close now, their engines growling, their treads churning the desert floor. Von Thoma walks toward them, hands empty, head high. A professional soldier surrendering with dignity to other professional soldiers. The lead tank stops 50 meters away. A hatch opens. A British officer emerges, astonished to find a German general walking alone toward their guns. Within hours, von Thoma is sitting in a tent behind British lines, drinking tea with Major General Bernard Freyberg. They speak in careful English, 2 warriors showing mutual respect. Von Thoma is polite, correct, revealing nothing of operational value. He has lost this battle, but he maintains his bearing. He is a prisoner now, but still a general of the Wehrmacht. He does not yet know that his war is about to teach him a lesson more devastating than any defeat on the battlefield. December 1942. A prisoner of war camp, England. The camp is austere but civilized. German officers are housed separately from enlisted men, given books, allowed to exercise. Von Thoma shares quarters with other captured senior officers, men who speak quietly of the war's progress, of rumors and hopes. He receives newspapers, censored but informative. He reads about Stalingrad, where the 6th Army is encircled. He reads about Allied convoys to Britain, about American troops landing in North Africa. The war, he knew, is changing shape, becoming something larger and more terrible than anyone in Berlin had anticipated. One morning in January 1943, a British intelligence officer arrives. The man is courteous, scholarly, more professor than soldier. He sits across from von Thoma in an interview room and makes small talk about the weather, about conditions in the camp. Then he opens a folder. "General, may I ask you a professional question?" Von Thoma nods warily. "Based on your experience, how many tanks do you estimate Germany can produce in a month?" It's a question von Thoma can answer without compromising security. The numbers are educated estimates, nothing more. "Perhaps 300, von Thoma says. "Perhaps 400 in a good month. Our industry is efficient, but resources are limited." The British officer writes this down. Then he slides a document across the table. It's a production report, stamped with official Allied markings. "The United States produced 2,400 tanks last month," the officer says calmly, "not including British or Soviet production. Just the Americans." Von Thoma stares at the paper. The number seems impossible. "You're mistaken," he says, "or this is propaganda." The British officer smiles sadly. "I assure you, General, it is neither." He produces another document. Aircraft production figures. The Americans are building bombers and fighters at a rate that dwarfs the Luftwaffe's entire inventory. And ships, Liberty ships by the dozen every week, carriers, destroyers, cruisers. Von Thoma feels something shift inside him, some foundational assumption cracking. He has fought in this war believing that German skill, discipline, and battlefield excellence would overcome material disadvantages. But these numbers suggest something else entirely, a kind of industrial power that renders battlefield excellence almost irrelevant. How? He asks quietly. That, the British officer says, is something we'd like to show you. March 1943. Aboard a transport ship, Atlantic Ocean. Von Thoma stands on deck as the ship steams west through cold Atlantic waters. He is one of several high-ranking German prisoners being transported to the United States. The stated reason is security. Prisoner camps in Britain are overcrowded and the Americans have space. But von Thoma suspects another motive. He is being taken to see something. The other German officers speculate endlessly. One thinks they'll be used for propaganda, paraded before American newsreel cameras. Another believes they're being taken somewhere remote to be interrogated more aggressively. Von Thoma says nothing, but he remembers that British officer and those impossible production numbers. The Atlantic crossing takes 12 days. Von Thoma watches the horizon and thinks about the war. He thinks about the Africa Corps, now crushed between British and American armies. He thinks about Russia, where reports filter through even to prisoners. Stalingrad has fallen, the Sixth Army destroyed. He thinks about his own career, the battles he won with obsolete equipment and sheer audacity. And he wonders if audacity matters anymore. When they reach New York Harbor, von Thoma sees the Statue of Liberty through morning fog. The city beyond is vast, untouched by war, its buildings gleaming in sunlight. There are no bomb craters, no rationing queues, no widows in black. America looks impossibly wealthy, impossibly confident. The prisoners are transferred to a train, the windows are curtained, but occasionally von Thoma glimpses the landscape sliding past, farms heavy with crops, towns bustling with traffic, factories with smokestacks that never seem to stop burning. He begins to understand why he's here. April 1943. Willow Run, Michigan. The car pulls through gates and stops before the largest building Wilhelm von Thoma has ever seen. It stretches across the Michigan countryside like a horizontal skyscraper, a quarter-mile long, its roof a vast expanse of skylights glinting in the spring sun. The sign reads, Willow Run Bomber Plant. His American escorts, polite officers from Army intelligence, lead him toward the entrance. Von Thoma walks slowly, trying to comprehend the scale. He has commanded tank factories in Germany, toured aircraft production facilities. He knows what industrial capacity looks like. This is something else entirely. Inside, the sound hits him first. A roar of machinery, hammers, rivet guns, engines being tested, an orchestrated thunder that fills the massive space. The air smells of metal and oil and fresh paint. And then he sees the assembly line. B-24 Liberator bombers, dozens of them in various stages of completion, moving along a production line that disappears into the distance. Workers, men and women both, thousands of them, swarm over the aircraft like industrious ants. Welders throw sparks, riveters hammer aluminum skin onto frames, engines are lowered by crane onto wing mounts. An American officer, Colonel Patterson, who serves as his guide, speaks loudly to be heard over the noise. This facility operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, General. 3 shifts. At peak production, we complete 1 B-24 every 63 minutes. Von Thoma stops walking. Every hour. Every 63 minutes, Patterson repeats. We produced 42 aircraft last week. By next year, we'll be producing over 650 per month at this facility alone. They walk deeper into the plant. Von Thoma sees subassembly areas where wings are built, where tail sections are constructed, where instrument panels are wired. Everything is organized with ruthless efficiency, each station feeding the next, the entire process flowing like a mechanical river toward the final assembly point. Patterson leads him to an observation platform overlooking the main line. From here, von Thoma can see the entire operation. A bomber enters at one end as little more than a skeleton, a framework of aluminum ribs and longerons. It moves down the line, and at each station it becomes more complete. Wings attached, engines mounted, skin riveted, windows installed, paint applied. And at the end, 63 minutes later, A complete B-24 Liberator bomber rolls out onto the tarmac, ready for its test flight. Von Thoma watches in silence as this process repeats. Another bomber begins its journey. Workers move with practiced precision. There are no wasted motions, no delays. The line never stops. "How many workers?" he asks. 42,000 at this plant alone, Patterson says. Many of them women. We call them Rosie the Riveters. Before the war, most were housewives, secretaries, teachers. Now they're building the aircraft that will liberate Europe. Von Thoma feels something cold settling in his chest. He does the mathematics automatically, the kind of calculation any general makes. If this one factory produces 650 bombers per month and America has dozens of factories, if each bomber requires a crew, and those crews are being trained somewhere in equally vast numbers, if every bomber carries tons of explosives, and those explosives are being manufactured in still more factories. "General?" Patterson is watching him carefully. "Are you all right?" Von Thoma realizes he's gripping the railing hard enough that his knuckles are white. He releases it, straightens, resumes the bearing of a professional officer. "It's impressive," he says quietly. Patterson's expression is sympathetic but firm. "This is just one factory, General. We're building similar facilities for tanks, for fighters, for transport aircraft. We're producing more steel in a month than Germany produces in 6. Our shipyards launch more tonnage in a week than the U-boats can sink in a month." They walk further. Patterson shows him quality control stations where every component is inspected. He shows him the training areas where workers learn their jobs in days. He shows him the parking lots, vast fields of automobiles belonging to the workers, more cars than Von Thoma has seen in all of Germany. "The average American worker owns a car," Patterson says. "Many own homes. They're not fighting for survival, General. They're fighting for liberty, and they have the tools to win." At the end of the tour, they stand beside a completed B-24, its aluminum skin gleaming, its 4 engines powerful and new. Patterson places a hand on the fuselage. This bomber will join thousands of others over Europe. It will drop its bombs on German factories, on rail lines, on fuel depots. And when it's damaged or shot down, we'll replace it with 2 more, then 4 more, then 8 more. Von Thoma looks at the aircraft, then back at the assembly line, where another bomber is nearing completion. He thinks of the Luftwaffe, struggling to produce a few dozen aircraft per month, cannibalizing damaged planes for parts, flying missions with obsolete equipment. He thinks of every battle he ever won, every tactical victory, every clever maneuver. And he understands with perfect clarity that none of it matters. That evening, officers' quarters, prisoner of war facility. Von Thoma sits alone in his room, a Spartan space with a bed, a desk, and a window overlooking empty fields. On the desk are the notes he's been allowed to keep, his observations from the day. He does the calculations again, writing carefully with a pencil stub. If Willow Run produces 650 bombers per month, that's 7,800 per year from one factory. Patterson mentioned at least 20 major aircraft production facilities. Even at reduced rates, that's over 100,000 aircraft per year. Plus, fighters, transports, reconnaissance planes. He calculates tank production using the same methodology. Thousands per month, tens of thousands per year. And artillery pieces, trucks, jeeps, rifles, ammunition, all of it pouring from American factories in quantities that dwarf Axis production. Then he calculates something else, the cost to Germany of destroying American equipment. If the Luftwaffe shoots down 10 American bombers in a raid, those bombers will be replaced within days. But the German fighters and pilots lost in that same engagement? Irreplaceable. Germany is burning through its experienced pilots, its mechanics, its resources, fighting an enemy that grows stronger with every month. It's not war, it's mathematics. And the mathematics are inexorable. A knock at the door. Another German officer, Colonel Brandt, enters. He's been a prisoner longer than Von Thoma, captured in Tunisia. "You saw it today," Brandt says. It's not a question. Von Thoma nods. Brandt sits heavily. "I was taken to a steel mill in Pittsburgh last year. They produce more steel in that one facility than all of Germany produces total, and they have dozens of such mills." "Did you report this?" Von Thoma asks. Brandt laughs bitterly. To whom? We're prisoners. But even if we could send word to Berlin, would they believe us? Would the Führer? Von Thoma knows the answer. Hitler surrounds himself with yes-men, with people who tell him what he wants to hear. Reports of American production are dismissed as propaganda, as impossible exaggerations. The leadership in Berlin has no concept of what American industry can achieve because they have never seen anything like it. We're going to lose, Von Thoma says quietly. Not because of any single battle. We're going to lose because we're fighting an economy that can outproduce us 20-1. Brandt nods slowly. I reached that conclusion 6 months ago. The only question now is how long the war lasts and how many more men die before the inevitable end. They sit in silence, two professional soldiers confronting an uncomfortable truth. All their training, all their experience, all their victories mean nothing when measured against the industrial power they've witnessed. Germany is a skilled boxer fighting a sledgehammer. Eventually, the sledgehammer wins. May 1943, a formal dinner, location undisclosed. The Americans arrange a dinner for their high-ranking German prisoners. It's held in a private room, attended by American military officers, intelligence personnel, and what Von Thoma suspects are senior officials from the Roosevelt administration, though introductions are deliberately vague. The meal is elaborate by wartime standards: roast beef, fresh vegetables, wine. Von Thoma notices everything: the quality of the food, better than what German civilians are eating, the casual abundance, the confidence of the American officers who speak about the war not as a struggle but as a project with a timeline and expected deliverables. After dinner, brandy is served. An American general, a man introduced only as General Matthews, raises his glass. Gentlemen, I know these are unusual circumstances. You are prisoners, we are your captors, and we are enemies in this war. But I hope you'll permit me a toast to the end of this conflict and a future peace. The German officers exchange glances. Some raise their glasses, others don't. Von Thoma raises his, though he doesn't drink. Matthews continues, his tone becoming more serious. General Von Thoma, you've now seen a small portion of American industrial capacity. I won't insult your intelligence by asking what you think. You're a professional soldier. You understand what you've witnessed. Von Thoma sets down his glass. I understand that Germany is facing an opponent whose resources are effectively unlimited. Not unlimited, Matthews corrects, but vast and growing. Every month our production increases. Every month more factories open, more workers are trained, more weapons roll off the lines. Meanwhile, what happens to German production? Von Thoma doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. Everyone at the table knows. German factories are being bombed. German resources are being exhausted. German industry is contracting while American industry expands. Matthews leans forward. General, I want to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Not for propaganda, not for the record, just between soldiers. Can Germany win this war? The room falls silent. Every eye turns to Von Thoma. He considers his words carefully. He is still a German officer, still bound by his oath, but he is also a realist, a professional who has looked into the abyss and understood what he saw. No, he says finally. Not unless something fundamental changes. Not unless America withdraws or Britain surrenders or some miracle occurs. If the current trajectory continues, Germany will lose. It's not a question of if, but when. A murmur ripples through the American officers. They clearly expected this answer, but hearing it confirmed by a German general carries weight. How long? Matthews asks. Von Thoma considers. 2 years, perhaps 3. The Eastern Front will grind on. The bombing campaign will intensify. Eventually, Allied armies will invade France, and when they do, they will have the equipment, the supplies, the support to push through. Germany's army is still formidable, but we're fighting with dwindling resources against an enemy that replaces its losses faster than we can inflict them. And yet your country fights on, Matthews says, because the Führer orders it, Von Thoma replies. His voice is flat, empty of emotion. Because to suggest otherwise is treason, because the leadership in Berlin either doesn't understand what they're facing or refuses to accept it. Matthews nods slowly. If you could send a message to Berlin, What would you say? Von Thoma looks at his brandy glass, swirling the amber liquid. I would tell them what I saw today. I would tell them that continuing this war is not courage, it's waste. Every soldier who dies from this point forward dies needlessly, because the outcome is already determined. Germany is not fighting for victory anymore. We're fighting to delay inevitable defeat. The words hang in the air, stark and terrible in their honesty. Another American officer speaks up. Could you not argue, General, that fighting on serves a purpose? That resistance, even futile resistance, has value? Von Thoma looks at him. Value to whom? Not to the soldiers dying in Russia, not to the civilians dying in bombing raids. The only value is to the Führer's pride. He pauses, then adds quietly, I'm a soldier. I've followed orders my entire career. But there comes a point when orders and reality diverge so completely that following them becomes not duty, but madness. June 1943. Von Thoma's quarters. The American intelligence officers ask von Thoma to write an account of his observations, ostensibly for historical purposes, but obviously intended for psychological warfare. Von Thoma agrees with the understanding that his letter will remain sealed until after the war, or used in ways that won't endanger his family in Germany. He writes carefully, in precise German script, to whom it may concern. I write this as a general officer of the Wehrmacht, a prisoner of war, and a witness to realities that our leadership must confront. I have seen American industrial capacity with my own eyes. The production figures we've been told are propaganda are, if anything, understatements. The United States is producing weapons, aircraft, and vehicles at rates that exceed our most pessimistic estimates. The Willow Run facility alone produces more bombers in a month than Germany produces in 6. And this is one factory among dozens. The mathematics are inescapable. For every German tank destroyed, 5 American tanks take its place. For every German aircraft shot down, 10 more appear in the sky. I say this not to demoralize, but to inform. As soldiers, we must confront reality, not fantasy. The reality is that Germany is fighting an opponent whose production capacity dwarfs our own, whose resources are untapped, and whose will to fight is strengthened rather than weakened by our resistance. Continued resistance under these circumstances is not heroism. It is the prolonged agony of a patient who cannot be saved but refuses to acknowledge it. Every day this war continues, thousands of our soldiers die for a cause already lost. Every bombing raid on German cities kills civilians whose deaths achieve nothing strategically. If this account reaches those with the power to act, I urge them, seek terms while Germany still has some negotiating position. End this war before Germany is utterly destroyed. The longer we fight, the worse the final settlement will be. I write this knowing it may be considered treasonous, but my greater treason would be remaining silent when I have seen the truth. Wilhelm Ritter von Thoma, General Lieutenant. He seals the letter and hands it to the American officer who collects it. He knows it will be read, analyzed, possibly distributed to other German prisoners. He doesn't care. He has stated what he believes to be true. December 1943. London. Winston Churchill sits in his study, reviewing intelligence reports. Among them is a transcript of conversations with captured German officers, including extensive debriefings of General von Thoma. Churchill reads von Thoma's account with grim satisfaction. The German general's conclusions mirror Churchill's own assessment. The war is decided, not by any single battle, but by the overwhelming industrial superiority of the Allied powers, particularly the United States. Churchill recalls a conversation from earlier in the war when victory seemed distant and uncertain. Roosevelt had promised that American industry would turn the tide, that factories would become the weapons that won the war. Churchill had believed him, but believing and seeing are different things. Now he sees. The reports crossing his desk detail American production in staggering numbers: 96,000 aircraft in 1943 alone, 29,000 tanks, thousands of ships, mountains of ammunition, fuel, food, supplies. Churchill makes a note for his eventual war memoirs. The German general, upon learning of American production figures, conceded that the war was lost. He stated that continued fighting was simply the Führer's order, nothing more. It's a damning epitaph for Nazi Germany's war effort. A professional soldier, one of their best, acknowledging that everything from this point forward is waste, murder, and stubbornness disguised as duty. Churchill sets aside the report and gazes out at the London night. Somewhere in the darkness, British bombers are taking off for a raid on Germany. Soon, they'll be joined by American bombers, hundreds of them, built in factories like Willow Run. And tomorrow, more bombers will roll off the assembly lines, and the day after, more still. The arsenal of democracy, Roosevelt called it, and Churchill understands now that this is not mere rhetoric. It is mathematical truth, industrial reality, the grinding certainty of production tables and supply chains and economic power. Germany is fighting a war it has already lost. The battles continue, but the outcome is determined. It's just a matter of time. April 1945. Von Thoma's quarters, prisoner of war facility. General Wilhelm von Thoma listens to the radio as the announcer describes the fall of Berlin. The war in Europe is ending, collapsing, finishing exactly as he predicted 2 years earlier when he stood in Willow Run and watched bombers roll off the assembly line every 63 minutes. He feels no satisfaction at being right. He feels only a deep weariness, the exhaustion of a man who has witnessed unnecessary death on a scale that staggers comprehension. The numbers filter in through news reports and intelligence briefings that prisoners are now allowed to hear. Germany has lost millions of soldiers. Soviet armies have ravaged Eastern Europe. German cities are rubble. The country he served his entire life is destroyed, utterly and completely. And for what? He thinks about the production figures he saw, the factories, the certainty with which American officers described the war's trajectory. They knew, even then. They knew that every month the war continued was another month of needless death, another increment of destruction that served no strategic purpose. Hitler knew too, or should have known. The information was available. Intelligence reports, captured documents, simple observation should have made it clear that continuing the war after 1943 was fantasy. But fantasy is easier than facing hard truths, especially for dictators surrounded by sycophants. Von Thoma wonders how history will judge this. Will they understand that the war was lost not in any particular battle, but in the factories of Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Los Angeles? Will they comprehend that strategic bombing, Normandy, the race to Berlin, all of it was possible only because America's industrial base was untouched and growing? He doubts it. People will remember the battles, the generals, the dramatic moments. They'll forget that wars, in the end, are won by logistics, production, and economic power. The dramatic stuff is just theater on top of deeper realities. A knock at the door, an American officer enters, younger than the ones von Thoma dealt with earlier in his captivity. General von Thoma, the war in Europe is over. You'll be repatriated to Germany within the next few months once processing is complete. Von Thoma nods. Thank you, Captain. Sir, may I ask you something? Of course, the young captain hesitates. You saw Willow Run back in 43. Was it really that moment when you knew? Von Thoma considers the question. I knew before then, intellectually. But seeing it? Yes. That was when it became real. When I understood in my bones that everything we were doing was futile. Did it change how you viewed the war? It changed how I viewed everything, von Thoma says quietly. I spent my whole career believing that skill, courage, and leadership could overcome material disadvantages. That a well-trained soldier was worth 5 poorly trained ones. That quality beats quantity. And now? Now I know that quantity has its own quality. A mediocre tank that exists beats a perfect tank that doesn't. An adequate bomber that reaches its target beats a superior fighter that lacks fuel. War is mathematics, Captain, and America did the mathematics better than anyone else. The captain nods slowly. For what it's worth, sir, the officers who dealt with you said you were honest. That took courage. Von Thoma shrugs. Honesty is easy when you're already defeated. The courage would have been speaking truth to power before the war was lost. But I didn't do that. None of us did. Historical perspective, The broader meaning. The story of General Wilhelm von Thoma's realization is a small chapter in a much larger narrative. The story of how World War II was won not primarily by battlefield genius, but by industrial capacity and economic power. When America entered the war in December 1941, Adolf Hitler famously dismissed American military potential. He saw America as soft, divided, materialistic, a nation of shopkeepers incapable of sustaining a long war. He was catastrophically wrong. The United States mobilized its economy with a speed and efficiency that shocked the world. Factories that had produced automobiles began producing tanks and aircraft. Women entered the workforce by the millions, replacing men who went to war. Entire industries were created from nothing. Synthetic rubber plants, aluminum refineries, shipyards that could build Liberty ships in days rather than months. Willow Run was the symbol, but it was far from unique. The Ford Motor Company alone produced more military equipment during the war than Italy managed total. American shipyards launched more tonnage in 1943 than Japan built in its entire history. The Chrysler tank arsenal produced more tanks than the entire German industry. And, critically, all of this happened thousands of miles from any fighting. While German factories were being bombed, while Soviet industry was being relocated eastward to escape the German advance, American factories operated around the clock in perfect safety, churning out weapons that filled ships that sailed in convoys that became, ultimately, unstoppable. The numbers tell the story better than any narrative. Germany produced 89,000 aircraft during the entire war. America produced 300,000. Germany produced 67,000 tanks. America produced 88,000, plus thousands more for Lend-Lease to Britain and the Soviet Union. Germany's peak steel production was 28 million tons per year. America produced 90 million tons. These aren't just statistics. They're the explanation for why the war ended as it did. Every German tactical victory, every brilliant maneuver, every desperate counterattack was ultimately meaningless because the strategic balance was so lopsided. Germany was trying to win a war of attrition against an opponent who could afford to lose 5 tanks for everyone they destroyed and still come out ahead. Von Thoma understood this viscerally when he saw Willow Run. Other German generals came to the same realization through different paths. Albert Speer, Germany's armaments minister, later admitted that he knew by 1943 that Germany couldn't win a production war. But knowing and acting are different things, especially in a totalitarian state where speaking truth can be fatal. The tragedy is that so many died after the outcome became clear. From 1943 onward, Germany was fighting a lost war. Every soldier killed, every civilian bombed, every city destroyed happened after the strategic reality became obvious to anyone paying attention. But Hitler refused to see it, or refused to accept it, or simply didn't care. He ordered the war to continue, and it continued, and the death toll mounted, and Germany was systematically destroyed. Von Thoma's story is important because it represents professional military assessment confronting reality. Here was a man with no ideological attachment to Nazism, a soldier who understood warfare at the highest level, stating plainly, "The war is lost, continuing it is waste, and the reason it's lost is because we're being outproduced on a scale we can't match." His honesty didn't change anything. The war continued for 2 more years, but his assessment was accurate, and history has vindicated it. 1984, Bavaria, Germany. Wilhelm von Thoma lives quietly in a small town, a retired general in a defeated nation. He gardens, he reads, he occasionally corresponds with other former officers who survived the war. He does not speak publicly about his experiences. Sometimes former soldiers visit him, men who served under his command in North Africa or earlier campaigns. They ask what it was like, being a prisoner in America. They ask if it's true, what the rumors say, that he told the Americans Germany would lose, that he saw factories and knew the war was over. He tells them, yes, it's true. He describes Willow Run, the assembly lines, the impossible production rates. He explains the mathematics of industrial warfare, how quality cannot overcome sufficient quantity, how Germany was fighting an opponent with effectively limitless resources. Most of them nod sadly. They've reached the same conclusions through their own experiences. You don't need to see Willow Run to understand that Germany lost the production war. You just need to have fought on the Eastern Front or in Italy or in France after D-Day, where Allied material superiority was so overwhelming that tactical skill became almost irrelevant. One former lieutenant asks, should we have surrendered earlier? Could it have been ended sooner? Von Thoma considers this. Rationally, yes. After Stalingrad, certainly after Kursk, Germany should have sought terms. But wars aren't fought rationally, especially when dictators are in charge. Hitler would rather see Germany destroyed than admit defeat, so Germany was destroyed. The lieutenant leaves, and Von Thoma returns to his garden. He plants vegetables, tends flowers, does the small, peaceful work of ordinary life. He has seen enough of war, enough of death, enough of the great grinding machines of industrial conflict. He knows what he witnessed in Willow Run was the future of warfare. Not heroism and tactics, but production schedules and supply chains in the cold mathematics of industrial capacity. And he knows that Germany, for all its military skill, never had a chance against that future. The war was lost in Michigan and Pittsburgh and Los Angeles, in the factories that never stopped running, in the assembly lines that never slowed down, in the absolute, undeniable, crushing weight of American industrial power. General Wilhelm von Thoma saw it, understood it, and stated it plainly. The war was lost. Everything after was just the Führer's order, the death throes of a nation that refused to accept reality. And history, brutal and certain, proved him right.